Good.
Okay, we are back for CRJ550, and it is 9:45 a.m. We are now going to commence with going through our group discussion using the same system we had before, where we simply went around the room. So we're going to start over here with Mr. Beaver and go from there. Let's see, I'm going to take a seat. I'll just have to fill in. It'll be like the Oscars or the Emmys. I will fill in seats where people have got up to accept their final awards.
We good?
We are.
All right. We looked at female police officers, and as far as the hypothesis, Chief Wilson hypothesized that women can perform the job as well as men and be equally efficient. The treatment we saw was women assigned to the same duties had the same expectations as men. Some of the variables included in this, there were 86 new hires and as well as 25 reassigned women that were matched with a male officer with similar experience. They observed 1 officer patrols and 2 officer patrols, and only observed evening shifts. Other variables, they looked at demographic data on each of the officers in the study. Men and women were used in the study, and researchers looked at job performance as well as community and officer attitudes. Police observers were officers with at least 1 year of experience, and women were assigned to experimental districts and matched with comparison districts. All you, sir.
Outstanding. So, in essence, what they did is they matched males and females with similar assignments and similar training to compare between the two to decide whether there was any real variation in their performance, and therefore going forward, what should be done about females in law enforcement. So, as a result of the study, in order to even begin the study, they had to, Washington DCPD had to lower their minimum height and requirements in order to facilitate hiring and placing on staff more females. But part of the results were that only long-term, only 45% of the females in the study stayed in patrol. There was a tendency for them to move to other assignments, clerical, juvenile investigations, PIO, you name it, but they generally gravitated back off of patrol. 71% of men stayed in patrol of the sample. Women were also more likely assigned, those that stayed in patrol were more likely assigned to 1 officer foot patrol. That tended to be either due to their preference or due to the preference of their supervisors based on their skill set. There's no conclusion as to why that was, but that they tended to end up there. As far as overall job performance, the females performed quantitatively as well as males did. There were a few differences. Males had slightly more arrests, citations, traffic stops, more self-initiated field activity. But on the whole, of the measures that were used, calls for service, response times, reports written, things of that nature, there was virtually no difference between males and females. Women had slightly less incidents per hour, but that was, again, probably due to the more self-initiated field activity on the part of the males. Women were typically engaged in more non-patrol related functions. And that as far as their conviction rates, once again, they were basically identical. Their department appraisal ratings, the same. They did have differences when it came to misconduct. Males were more likely to engage in misconduct. Those of you in this field, probably that doesn't come as a surprise. Survey results. They did surveys both of officers and citizens, co-officers and supervisors, in order to determine attitudes. Because as you know, any type of change involving long-held beliefs about whether somebody's suitable for law enforcement or not is going to be met with predisposed ideas. Citizens, while they did have, they felt like females should be involved and should be allowed the opportunity to be in patrol, they were a little skeptical about their ability to handle violent situations. And that also held somewhat true for surveys within the department. It wasn't a large difference, but co-officers did feel like males were better at handling in-progress type calls, the calls that were happening right here, right now. They, on the other hand, felt like females could do better on investigations involving sexual assaults in juveniles. So on the whole, although there did seem to be some perception differences, the conclusion of the research project was that gender is not a bona fide occupational qualification for doing police patrol work. Interestingly, survey-wise, everybody, males and females, I think preferred a male partner. And I think that had something to do with that lingering feeling that females were not as good as males at in-progress responses. Their performance appraisals, though, didn't support that. Their performance appraisals supported them being as good as male officers in violent encounters. The authors of the study listed some benefits to hiring females: larger pool of applicants, greater representation of the community at large, fewer cases of misconduct, and the belief by citizens that females are less antagonistic, more inclined to de-escalate situations, things of that nature, would be benefits to having them in there. So what do we do based on that? What's the implication? The answer is pretty simple: hire females. They are a benefit in law enforcement. They bring skill sets that males may not have. It's tough to overgeneralize because even within the genders, you've got differences in skill sets and capabilities, but at least the perception is that females can de-escalate and are better communicators and may do better in some investigative circumstances. So under the procedural justice model, if your department has the appearance of the community, either through gender or race or whatever measure, then the community is more likely to be cooperative with and obey law enforcement because they believe them to be representative of them. So, like I said, the implication is hire more females. You may have to change the hiring requirements, such as Washington PD did with height and weight, or focus. You may have to specifically target locations where females that would be interested in law enforcement can be found. But that would be the implication. And then on top of that, within a department, seek to promote qualified females. Because as we know, supervisors set the direction and the heading of a department. And so you would need that perspective there as well.
Thoughts or questions? I have a page, but I don't want to leave those discussion. So let me prompt you. You heard the information. Okay, Ken.
Are they advocating basically positive discrimination to promote women?
See, now you're going after affirmative action. They're not advocating, well, it depends on your perspective on that, because it depends on where you stand as to whether it's positive discrimination or not. They are advocating that it is a good thing for an agency to reflect the makeup of a community. And if in order to do that, you have to be focused in your attempts to make that happen, it might bear the appearance of positive discrimination. But again, I think it depends on where you stand as to whether or not that's in fact the case. I don't think they're advocating lowering hiring standards in the quality of person.
Okay.
In other words,
No.
you know, like a test score or something of that nature. I
If
think
you've got
they-
two equal candidates,
Right.
one's female, one's male, who do you promote? According to
That's the problem, is anybody ever equal? My answer to that would be, you don't really find folks that are incredibly awesomely equal in every continuum. You know, do you as an agency gain from having a minority, be it a female or an African American or Latino American or whatever, in a leadership position? I think you do. And so what do you do to make that happen? Do you make a hard decision where apparently equal folks are both up for the same position? Depends on your priority.
Sorry. No, I was going to say, they mentioned anything to do about retention of female officers.
They did.
And
In fact,
how,
it was,
what solution did they basically offer for retaining female?
there wasn't that I saw. I didn't see a solution for that, but you're right, that was a difficult thing. With the fact that they bear children and things of that nature will sometimes interrupt their careers. Yeah, that was brought up as an issue, but they didn't offer any solutions to that.
In the discussion, I put on someone's paper, I can't remember who it was, in the Met in London, they did a survey of female officers, and 4 out of 10 had seriously considered leaving.
Yeah, I think you
Was
responded
it?
to mine.
Was it? I
Yeah.
can't remember whose paper it was.
Yeah, and I think, you know,
In
that,
2012 that was.
I think just in Greenville County, I would say that in my experience, certainly not, I can't hold stats, but in my experience, that tends to hold true.
Yeah.
I think we have seemingly a higher turnover for whatever reason.
And one of the reasons given was the attitude of basically senior officers and the fact there was not any sort of system in place that was valued to give basically women time off for childcare issues, maternity leave. that type of thing.
They do exist.
But yes, they do exist, but the attitude of management
Oh,
is-
well, yeah.
is, how can I put this politely, less than sympathetic.
I think that's changing.
Yeah,
In fact, I have one of my investigators, male investigator, taking the the optional 12 weeks of FMLA.
yeah.
I don't know what I would do for 12 weeks at home with my wife just
Yeah.
having a baby, but that's what he's doing.
But some people would say that's not even enough. Over here, it's different abroad than it is to here. But even in 2012, the fact that 4 out of 10 women thinking of seriously leaving the NPS, I thought, well, what does that say about how far we've come?
I think that attitudes linger, even certainly within the agency and within supervisors. And I think it also lingers within our citizenry as to the stereotypes of a male officer being this strong, in progress handling kind of guy versus a female officer. And I think they don't bear out to be the case at all.
If I may interject, I know Darren has a question. Jimmy, just because you are distinguished by what we know your years of service, your experience in administration, et cetera, make the argument, setting political correctness aside, make the argument that women should not be participants as frontline practitioners in law enforcement.
I think women are more emotional when they're dealing with situations than men, and if they are a supervisory position and let their emotions take charge instead of the facts, they wouldn't produce the same thing. I don't think men respect women equally in their decision making. When men are out there doing their job, they don't think that a woman supervising them has their best interests at heart. They feel like that the woman there is looking out just for herself and trying to move up. And as we all know, women basically get promoted because of who they know and how they rub up against their male counterparts. So they don't actually earn their position, they kind of just work their way up that way.
Now, because we're on video, I just want to make sure that's understood. I asked Jimmy to make the argument. So when
I thought you did hold on next to
I gotta tell you, I saw it. I saw Shay and Crystal. They were like, "Can we jump up and scratch his eyes out?"
I was waiting,
Darren wrote me a note. Pay attention. Darren wrote me a note, like, body language of the two ladies. That's what he wrote. Because we're on video, and because when somebody else watches this in the future, I want you to know that you may be asked to make an argument you don't believe in, but I didn't ask if you believed in it. And sometimes we aren't asked if we believe in an argument. We have to understand the other side of the argument. And I thought Mr. Holcomb did a superlative job of making the argument and getting right to it, because he's been exposed to these thought processes in the future. Coming back to the argument, are men subject to making emotional decisions during the course of law enforcement?
Sure.
Do men sometimes attain their position because of who they know? What was the third point? I can't remember.
Exactly.
Jimmy was just over turning going out. I'm going to get stabbed in the eye here. I thought you did a superlative job, and recognize sometimes we have to do that. Sometimes we have to take arguments to their extreme manner so that we can expose the different facets of the thought process, no different than the different facets of a diamond, and Jimmy did a nice job. The reality is men are subject to emotions. Men sometimes achieve their position because of who they know. Shay and Crystal, just because Darren noticed it, I noticed it, and I think most of us on this side of the room make the argument that women should be allowed to be practitioners in frontline law enforcement. You can tag team, go ahead.
Oh, I feel that if, they go up for the promotion and they get promoted, but some women earn it. If you're gonna complain about your women supervisor, I feel you should go up for the position yourself. I know in my situation, I don't go to our, what you call the carpet and kiss anybody's behind to get promoted. I earned it, so.
Make the specific argument that women are just as qualified to be in frontline law enforcement, because then I'm going to come back to Mr. McKinney with a question here, so.
Women go through the same training, have the same education.
Yeah, but women aren't as strong physically. I mean, if they had to fight somebody, could they really take care of business?
They could, they got the same, they got weapons, they got the same opportunities to use.
So what you're saying essentially is that a woman like you, who weighs 120 pounds, and a guy like me who weighs 230 pounds, that you would be able to use force differently against a suspect than I would, simply because there's 100 pounds difference?
I might not have to use force, I might use my communication skills.
So suppose your communication skills fail, and because you had no other means, you had to pull out your service weapon and actually shoot somebody, whereas I could wrestle them down.
But then you got that, what we use is the 1+1 principle. He's bigger than me. If I'm the only one there, I use my means necessary.
And so what I was referring to are the Graham versus Connor factors of severity of threat, the threat posed by the suspect, and of course the seriousness of the crime. When we take a look at women in these positions, we see a metamorphosis. Jimmy helped us understand what has transpired through the years. And then we see even recently, Ranger women training. And I got a daughter that wanted to go in the military, got accepted in the Naval Academy, and I'm thinking, there's a lot of dads look at me like, you want your daughter to go there? And I'm like, well, wait a minute. If I want the best for the country, I think I've got one of the best. Why wouldn't I want to tender them up for service to this country? And so there was a case a few years ago where the Virginia Military Institute banned women. And the question became, because VMI received military funding, what was the real basis for keeping out women? And they engaged in this same analysis, can women do the job, et cetera. And we see now today in 2015, we have women doing Ranger training. But the real argument, what's the real argument? I think it's a better argument. We used to have matrons in the police department. You guys, do you remember that, Jimmy? The matrons that we had?
No.
No. So in the Columbus Police Department, we have 1,800 officers. We had a section of just matron, women policemen. So you had policemen, and then you had women policemen. And they were two different subsets, and they handled different duties. The matrons handled, traffic tickets, things like that. But they wore dresses to work and high heels and things like that. I think the better argument is in order to be the best, they gotta compete against the best. And so we're starting to see that argument rise to the top. I think it was percolated all along. It should have been the argument that rose to the top. But if we want to get the best, then everybody ought to be able to compete on an equal footing. And I think that's the real argument. Mr. McKinney, when you read the study, did you perceive that there was a bias or an animus in either direction, either for women in law enforcement or not in law enforcement? Or did you believe that the study that you read was ideologistically neutral?
There was actually mention in the study that the way they worded some of the questions was to prevent the bias and get that more direct result without having to factor in anything like you were talking about. No, I didn't feel like there was, once they redid the questions to weed out kind of some of the biases, I didn't feel like there was anything at that point, no.
Mr. Beaver, did you detect any bias or agenda promoted by this study?
Yeah, I think it was pro-female. I think that the nature of the original chief who started it in Washington, that was his goal. He was bringing the women, and I think the study, I don't think it undercuts its validity, but I do think that was sort of the expectation of what they were getting at.
So we have to be cautious about what, and when we're looking at these studies, you have to be good consumers of information. And to be a good consumer of information, you have to be able to see different agendas that may potentially be promoted. So every time you read a study, always ask yourself the who, what, where, when, why, and how of this particular study. Who's funding it? Who's promoting it? Why is it being studied? Because it reveals a bias in the study. It reveals an intention. It's interesting that this case happened in Washington because it was either 1972 or 1976. In the District of Columbia, there were two different tests. A test for those that were white and a test for those that were not white. And selection to become a police officer was based upon two different lists. And for a long time, even in law enforcement, even when I first got on law enforcement in 92, 93, they were still operating off the concept of two lists. And so for every minority, they would take a majority. For every majority, they would take a minority. So you had two lists. And it was in 1972 or 76 that in the city of Washington, federal court case said, no, you don't necessarily have to have two lists. And it was a case out of DC. So I agree, it is interesting that also the issue with females, and I see it's a 1974 study, that chief was, some people call it progressive, sometimes I think we progress towards the wrong thing. So I hate to use the word progressive to describe this. I think this would be more apt to be described as innovative. This would be more described as clearing the unnecessary ideological hurdles to get to an empirically based decision. Other questions, Darren? I know you raised your hand.
Well, going back to the female officers, in my experience, it seems to me that females are at an innate disadvantage. Just by the occupation in and of itself, the nature of the job puts females at a disadvantage, almost from the point when they walk through the door. When you have maternity issues, when you have other issues where men don't have to face those challenges. So it puts the female in a unique and a challenging situation because, you know, a guy, you can kind of work him a lot of hours and kind of kick him to the curb where, you know, there could be other issues with biology to even make it more challenging, especially if you're away or in some clandestine location. Guys can kind of just survive, and it takes a special effort. Back to the 40% of those who seriously consider quitting, in my opinion, that goes back to leadership. If I'm the chief of any division or an office, and 40% of my people are interested in leading, that's where the buck stops. That means that there's a problem with leadership. So in an exit entity, you want to drill down and find out why, especially if it's a certain group, if it's females, if it's ethnic, if it's cultural, whatever, leadership has to find out why. So,
One of the issues contemporarily experienced here with our own undergrads, we have what's called a criminal justice society. And this criminal justice society is undergraduate students coming together to discuss contemporary issues. And the prevailing issue amongst female undergraduate students is I want to have both a career and I also someday want to be a mom. I want to be a mom and I want to have a career. Hamilton, how do I navigate this scene? I've brought in, different women from different career bases, and I'll actually probably hit you two up at some point and say, please speak to these undergrads. Let them know how you have done it. Having grown up in a single parent family, where my mom rose to second in command before getting transferred back to Washington, I understand, the demands of my mom having to take care of me and my sister, and then also have to take care of work. It's a whole different demand set. And so going back to Kevin and both Darren's supposition, if 40% of the women are leaving,
They were thinking, the phrase was, I think, was seriously considered leaving. That was on a anonymous internal survey for just purely for women.
so Kevin, what ultimately was done in that situation, do you know?
Nothing. As far as I'm aware, nothing was done. We have policies and procedures in place, but I have to say probably more advantageous to women than they are here.
Ms. Norris and Ms. White-Williams, then enlighten us from your unique perspective. How could we incorporate this information as future leaders, as current and future leaders? How would you best like us to analyze and then provide a solution for the 40% who are contemplating leaving? The leadership analysis provided by Mr. White. How can we best analyze this? Educate your male counterparts.
I guess by listening to what females have to say, if they go to the leadership and discuss what issues they might have, actually listen to what they're saying too.
Okay, so we listen, and let's say we listen, as Mr. Beaver said, he said, well, some of the men now are taking advantage of the 12-week FMLA and they're hanging out at home. And a guy who had to use all of his FMLA when I was injured multiple times, I understand the value of it. So a guy like let's have Mr. Holcomb assume the position of antagonist. And he says, you know what? What do you women want? You want 20 weeks off now? What do you want? Respond.
I guess we want what's necessary for us to handle our situations at home and be prepared to come back ready to work.
So translate that into a real position. We understand the desire. Translate it, and I know we're only giving you a few seconds to do so. Translate it into a real position, a real policy of an organization.
12 months paid leave. Total leave.
Now, everybody understand, you can hear in Kevin's voice, hold on, Ms. Norris is going, no. Listen to what Kevin's saying. And the reason I say this is because Kevin gives us an international flavor, an international perspective. Kevin, why do you say that? Because you're not saying that to get giggles and laughs. Why are you saying it?
At the moment, the UK maternity leave is 6 months paid leave. 6 months, and the job has to be kept open. The European Union is currently proposing 12 months paid leave, maternity leave, for women, and paternity leave, they want up to 3, they're proposing 3 months. It's currently 14 days for men.
So we have a proposal, listen, we have a proposal, it says 12 months. Mr. Richardson, respond, before you respond with the perspective that you gutturally wanted to, respond from the perspective of an administrator who has to run a department. What are the impacts?
Well, it's certainly, it's gonna be a strain, but, I think that the thing about it is, that's important, is we have to look and see when a woman takes a leave of absence, there is the possibility that her perceptions of what she thought prior to having that baby may have changed. And what she might have perceived as a career that was most important may be focused now on the family, and we just have to be there and be ready for that and take the impacts of that. We may lose them as they go out, because as things change, maybe being an officer here is not their most important thing in their career or in their sight right now. Maybe being a mom is the biggest thing in their eyes. And we have to find out from the people who have left and came back what it is and why they have decided to come back versus the people that haven't, and see what we can do to facilitate those things.
And we can't spend all day on this, but you're speaking to the leadership, finding out the different analysis. Mr. Kelly, speak specifically to the financial impact of the proposal made by our European counterpart.
The proposal was 12 months,
12 months paid maternity leave.
job assignment.
The job is kept open for her to come back to.
Speak specifically to the financial impact of the pseudo Greer Police Department.
Okay. Well, I have to decide, my position here is I'm commanded by the people that hired me to provide a service. I have to think about that service that it's gonna impact, what would it do for that amount of time? I don't wanna decrease our level of service. I'm charged by the citizenry to provide that service. So it may be something I have to, take with our attorneys and speak with our personnel folks. We're really gonna have to talk about it.
Attorneys don't come into it, it's going to be law. So the bottom line is you have to do it.
I think, from what I gather that you're asking is, if that female has a job to do and she's gonna be out paid for 12 months, you're not only having to pay her, but whatever job she had, you're also having to either hire somebody else to fill that job while she's gone, put it on the backs of other people that are doing a similar job, or the job won't get done. And I think, the third option is probably not a very good option, the job not getting done. The job has to get done, so you either have to pay double salaries, one holding the one that's out on leave, and two, whoever's filling that spot. So I think financially it's a huge burden.
The nuts and bolts of it are, we have to come up with some money.
Right.
I think if they pass a law like that, they're also gonna influence the rate of females being hired in.
Yeah, because the more
Enforcement.
females you hire, I mean, the more
Because-
often that's gonna occur, so that's more money that you're gonna have to put for every time that, female has a baby or whatever.
And so implicitly, a ramification or a consequence then, Mr. McKinney, Mr. Beaver, would we see an increase in female hiring, status quo, or a decrease?
Can I jump back to that other question real quick?
Yes.
What if the person that's out on leave, you put that on someone else's back, you burn them out, they leave, then you have to hire another person, that's more money you're spending on training and all that.
Comes back to Mr. White's leadership analysis that Mr. Richardson was also building on. And so ultimately, what's the impact here?
You increase operating costs, just like the minimum wage. You move the minimum wage up, you have less jobs that are minimum wage jobs. It just works that way.
And where do the operating costs for the criminal justice system come?
Tax dollars.
Taxpayers.
I have to jump in here because we don't want to paint this picture that female officers are a burden.
Well,
That would be the wrong picture to look at,
Just-
so.
I agree with that, but, and I actually had to correct the command staff member, who's no longer command staff anymore, but I have to think about whenever we hire a female officer, and he says, I have to think about eventually, I'm gonna lose that officer for a period of time, and I gotta be prepared for that. So they had to create a division, and he said, we budgeted for a division, so when that officer came back, if she needed a position where she could only work days, or we put her in a cat team until she got readjusted to the road or wherever she wanted to be, I had to create that space. So it was something they had to do over time and get the council on board, but it was understanding we hire a female, we need to be prepared, and then we need to go ahead and budget ahead, but we need female officers, so this is the adjustments were made, and he was just really blunt about it in brass tacks, but he naturally assumed that we hire a female, there's potential she's gonna go out and there from the life or pregnancy, so we need to make sure that we cater to those needs, because that's a resource we are not prepared to lose, we don't wanna lose it, we need to keep it.
Sometimes they don't come back from maternity leave.
I agree, but then you hire more people.
And we also changed our policy on what he was saying about the men on the 12 weeks. You know, one guy take 12 weeks off and, because it said they were allowed to, but now they have to have a written doctor's note saying that they needed off for medical reasons to be with the wife for that length of time.
I think that's probably a legal issue that your department's gonna have, because it's a federal law, that you have to allow that. I myself am out on paternity leave right now. My wife gave birth last week, so.
You're still awake?
That's why I was
So
trying
you
to
can be away
do
from
it.
work, but you can't be, but you can be at school.
Oh.
Ouch.
And you can take that, Barb, but I've got a lot of dark. But don't worry about that, that takes us in a different direction, we can discuss that over lunch. You gotta,
No, I was just saying, I think if that is your policy for your department, I think you're probably gonna run into some legal issues at some point, because, you know, federal law mandates that you have to allow
12 weeks.
12 weeks.
Exactly, with 12 weeks off, not with pay.
Right.
Right. We'll give them 12 weeks. It's the pay part that they won't get,
Even if they have time built up.
even if they have time, unless it's for a medical reason.
You're right about that.
Is that not correct?
so we threw in ideology. We got somebody over here throwing in law. We had somebody over here throwing in leadership. We had somebody else throwing into the mix analysis of budgetary concerns and how we're going to handle all this. We can keep throwing it all in, right? We can keep doing it. Ultimately, it comes down to what? We gotta make some decisions. What are the takeaways we're gonna walk away from? I do not want you to ever leave this class and go, you know what, my mind is swirling more so than it was before. Because we can do that a lot, right? We can throw in a lot of stuff into the mix, and people are good at that. Read the news media every day. We stir pots all the time. Now, the takeaways from this are that the study has demonstrated that what?
Essentially that they perform similar to one another, males and females. And therefore, because there are advantages to having females on staff, you want to hire females.
There are some other considerations, financial, desires and wants, an ideal that we have to figure out, can we achieve that? Constitutionally, there are some requirements. When I say constitutionally, translate legally, there are some requirements. When we walk away from this discussion, it appears that females can do the job effectively, as do men. And we actually see that in some incidents, men receive or engaged in higher frequencies of misconduct than that of females. How do we put all this together? That's what makes this so exciting. Anybody that ever says, oh, this job sucks, it's boring. I'm like, you aren't looking in the right spot. There are all kinds of issues to get involved. We've heard from our female teammates. The female teammates said, listen, and let's come up with a solution. Solution may be 12 months, it may only be 12 weeks, but we certainly have a financial component. All of these go into the filtering process, and then just as you put piping on a cake, just as you squeeze everything down into a funnel, we have to come up with some conclusions. Currently, women are permitted to do the job. Currently, women do sometimes segregate themselves into certain functions, and they do so because of their own choice. We do have an upcoming issue as to how will we accommodate, incorporate, work around increased paternity, which is different from FMLA, everybody understand that. Increased maternity and paternity issues are different from FMLA, they truly are. A medical condition is different from the choice of procreation. How do we navigate that? We could spend a lot of time, you could do an entire senior seminar on just that issue. We're stopping right there. Thank you, gentlemen. Next up, I'll clean up my trash later because I'm sure it'll be representative of additional thoughts. Next up, let's go with Darren, Chad, Stephen, and I can't read my handwriting. Who else is in that? Barrett, yes. Looks like a P instead of a B, okay. I'll let you guys take the position up
You
here.
get stabbed, man. You get stabbed.
I'll wait. Wait for her to read that, if that can
Oh,
be.
yeah, I know. That's all
I'm not a
right.
violent person.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Should just break you down shotgun style with her mind.
I was fortunate enough to be on the security police and Air Force when they first brought me in, and I went there.
Yes, sir.
It was unique.
Okay, gentlemen, we are going to hear about the Kansas City experiment for open windows. We're going to hear about Newark Foot Patrol. And if I remember correctly, Darren, something, let's see, use of force, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
I went to a different group.
He came to
Yeah,
our
he
group.
with us.
Okay. Oh, okay. Gentlemen, go.
Who do you first?
Sure. Basically, Kansas City's study was basically, what they had done was they had taken an area of the city and they, just to make it easiest, they had three groups. They had a group where they just left alone with whatever they had. They had another group that what they call, or what we probably call today, a saturated patrol, where they increased a lot of officers with preventative patrol. And then they took one area and they pulled everything out. And basically they were looking at several different things. They wanted to see if there was a difference in crime, a difference in public perception. They wanted to know if there was a difference in response time, if there was an increase in traffic incidents where there was no preventative control, and public perceptions of safety. One thing that they found as they had some areas that were, they ran into some problems where they had some officers who didn't really want to take part in the study. Some officers got bored with it. And what they found was that as the thing concluded, they found that basically all of this stuff that they had thought that had prevented crime and just had no effect in it. Had no effect whether they put a bunch of people in there or whether it didn't. It had no ideas. It had no, the public didn't think it was any better to have a group of officers in there or anything else. They just kind of continued to move on. What they did later, though, is what's important, is when they did further research and they took these things and they said, instead of saturating an area with somebody, if we put some focus to it through the use of hot spots or other means like that, where we have a reason to put people in there, just not sticking people in an area for the sake of seeing them. But if we have an area where we actually have some disorder and we put those people in those areas, can we make a difference? And that's how some of the programs such as ComStat and things like that were created, by having down and sitting meetings and talking about where, if they were going to take extra resources, where they could devote those extra resources so they would actually have a positive impact instead of just a bunch of cars riding around back and forth with no real focus on the area.
Trying to decide, do I want all three gentlemen to present their areas? The problem is that shotgun approach, we may lose some precision of focus. Therefore, we're going to focus on what Mr. Richardson has shared and then go from there. And I know several of you wrote about the Kansas City experiment. Let's talk about methodology for a moment. When we talk about methodology, we're talking about the actual creation or the actual process of creating an empirically based study. And they were challenged with one of their and we talked earlier, there's the control group, the experimental group, and one of their experimental groups, the ones that were held back, so to say, don't go out and patrol. We're not going to, the officers suffered boredom. And so as a researcher, you have to account for how you're going to address these officers, because if these officers didn't say, well, the heck with that, I want to go out and participate, they could decrease the validity of what you're actually measuring, because they now are creating a spurious factor that cannot be accounted for, it was not a part of the original hypothesis. So in this situation, Mr. Richardson, you said the researchers dealt with boredom by,
They just, they kind of cruised over, I think, into other areas and got involved in other things. And that has a chain reaction because it spurs everything there, because it gives that area sometimes a quicker response window, because they might be right on top of something and they may be bored and they may go a little quicker or whatever. There's a multitude of reasons how that can have impacts all the way down the line.
Mr. Beaver, if you were the chief of the Kansas City Police Department back when this study was proposed, would you have had the courage to undertake withholding service, essentially? When I say withholding service, the crime was reported, car went out. But you essentially were, in essence, being asked to have the courage to withhold normal functions to a particular area. How would that have struck you?
I mean, it would have been sort of an ethical, because at the time, it was believed that patrol actually did deter crime, made residents feel safer and had an effect. I think it would have been an ethical consideration on my part as to whether I was gonna put my citizens in harm's way.
Methodology has cause for concern when we speak of ethical concerns. And so ethically, I would have been very troubled. Now, let's change the analysis. Who here would not have been troubled by that thought process? Anybody?
I would be less so, provided members of the public weren't kept waiting. There was a police response, but there wasn't any patrolling.
So there wasn't any patrolling, but there still was a police response. That is correct,
That's
Mr.
fine,
Moore.
yeah.
Okay, and so now let's change the analysis a little bit. Let's put your family in that area, and let's say all your extended family, let's say you got aunts, uncles, cousins, all your entire family lived within that precinct, within that beat, within that borough, where patrol was going to be withheld. How would that strike you?
Well, I know it's been withheld. That would be the point. And I'm none the wiser, then it would just be like a normal day. But if it's going to be kept within sort of, these four walls, then fine. How would, unless I'm going to communicate this new experiment to the community I'm serving, they're not really the wiser, are they? But I don't tell them till after the event.
Mr. Sully's wanting to jump on that. Go ahead, sir.
My issue with that is, are we dealing with an issue of response time? If we're having everybody hold back at the precinct and our average response time is 90 seconds to a hot call, but by holding everybody back, it's now 5 minutes for officers to run out to the car, get in the car, crank it up, roll to the scene. So we all know that there's the golden second when somebody's injured. We're the first one on scene. Does that create an undue risk to the general public? What are we doing to the general public by participating in this?
And all these would be examples of what kind of concerns, Mr. Beaver? And I want you to appreciate the courage that this leadership had to undertake. And I also want you to appreciate that from a methodology standpoint, these studies are very hard to conduct. People say, well, why don't we do more of these? Well, how many people want to have their police department, their organization, I'm gonna say tampered with, but I know that's not the exact word, because we're not tampering with evidence, but, and I don't want to use the word interfere because that reveals a bias. What's the right word I'm looking for here? Anybody? Wants to have treatment exacted upon their realm of authority in this way. And so if you're ever asked to participate in this, you're gonna have some of these same concerns. Do take note that somebody before you had the courage to undertake this kind of analysis and had ethical concerns, as Mr. Beaver spoke of. Anything else on, and we can talk about the Kansas City experiment. Intuitively, what were the final results of the study? I shouldn't say intuitively. The final results of the study are that
It has no effect. I mean, you can throw 30 cars in an area, but it has no effect on public perception or anything.
and a better question that I could have worded was this: empirically, we have evidence. Intuitively, we have a belief. Which would you be willing to make a decision on, Mr. Green? Your empirical evidence or your intuitive belief?
Initially got my intuitive belief, but like I said, like, there's no difference. It's, when I was thinking of the study, I think of my sister is nosy, and she likes to call me every time she sees a couple police cars. Are y'all doing a blitz this weekend? No, it's the same people, the same number working every shift. So that perception they have may be altered by an average day where there is no increased patrol, or, you know, we may increase patrol and she not see it and doesn't think that she's any better. So initially, when I first read Broken Windows, not Broken Windows, but the Kansas City theory in undergrad, I told my friends on law enforcement, she said, no, that's a lie. Increased patrol reduces crime. I said, well, not according to this. And then now, reading it again and experience firsthand, I mean, I agree. We could be right down the road and it still happens. So our patrol doesn't reduce the amount of crime in that area.
The ultimate goals of law enforcement are what? Control crime, and when we say control crime, we're really talking about arresting, prevent crime.
Preservation of life.
And when we talk about preservation of life, we're actually talking about, I have to say that then that falls into, it's not the service aspect of the model, it's the prevention aspect of the model. And so when we talk about service, we talk about prevention, and we talk about actually controlling crime. Intuitively, I have to admit, if I were in charge and my resources weren't otherwise encumbered, I'm putting out more patrols. And I authorized that on numerous times, the saturation patrols, the voluminous traffic stops. If I had an issue with resources and I was a leader of an organization, I would use this study to support my reduction of patrol and say, hey, look, studies have indicated it makes no difference. And resources dictate that I cannot make this investment at this time. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next on the Newark Foot Patrol. Basically what researchers were looking to do, Newark, New Jersey. They wanted to see a foot patrol. They had 7 different hypotheses they were testing. Essentially they wanted to know if foot patrol deterred crime, if it made the public feel more comfortable with police, if it gave them more trust with police, as well as the officers' attitudes as far as what they were doing, their importance for law enforcement, for the public, and everything like that. Essentially what they did is their control was somebody that already had foot patrol, they left it alone. Some of the experimental things they were doing were places that were foot patrol, they would reduce that number of foot patrol, and in other places that didn't have it, they would increase foot patrol. And basically went back to the public, went back to the businesses that were involved in these different areas and asked them, polled them, what was their opinions, what was their feelings. Essentially what they found out was the crime numbers didn't really change much with foot patrol versus vehicle patrol. The public's attitudes towards police increased. Public showed that they trusted police more, that they felt more comfortable, that they felt safer, that they weren't quite as worried about crime as when there was no or lesser foot patrol, just vehicle patrol. What I thought was odd was the businesses kind of showed the opposite effect, is they felt like crime was a little bit higher when there was foot patrol as opposed to just vehicle patrol. So it's kind of an oddity to me. But also when they went back and polled the police officers that were involved in foot patrol, they believed that their job showed that they had a better feeling of importance for their job when they were on foot patrol. Felt like their job mattered more, felt like they were out doing better things for the community, out, you know, played an important role as opposed to the people in vehicle patrol that they asked. As far as policy implications that could be created from this is not necessarily crime prevention. Some of the things that they looked at during the experiment, was some logs kept by the officers that were on foot patrol, and they found that they didn't do a whole lot of law enforcement. It was mostly community relations. It was out talking to people. It was out spending time with people, getting to know people. So I guess as far as community relations, especially in the times that we are right now, where there's a lack of trust, a lack of community acceptance with law enforcement, foot patrol could play a key role, especially in dense areas where foot patrol could be moved around easily. Although I don't think we could ever go back to pure foot patrol and eliminate the vehicle patrol, because there's still the element of needing to get places quickly, especially in less dense, less populated areas. So,
Thoughts, questions, observations? And I do not want to be the only one speaking on all of these, and I shouldn't be the only one having thoughts and ideas. So we learn best when we learn from each other. That is a mantra that I've promoted ever since the day I was involved in the shooting, and so let's abide by that here.
I think the way we're going now, like you said, with the community's perception of law enforcement, now's a good time to get back in the habits of foot patrol.
I agree, especially in areas with like downtowns. I know in Anderson, we've here recently implemented a downtown patrol. Shay's husband has recently been added to that. And from what I can gather, I haven't really talked to him, but the guy that was on it before, and another guy that's been there for a little while, they enjoyed that job. You know, they enjoyed going out, talking to people, and being involved in those closer connections with businesses and individuals that are down there. And I think what we're also getting from them is they feel more comfortable. You know, if they see a police officer sitting over here, even if he's not doing law enforcement related stuff, just talking to the public, you know, having conversations, you know, just being around, I think it makes them feel more comfortable, safer.
Yeah, I just think it's becoming a necessity today to have foot patrols come back.
I challenge you. Why is it a necessity?
Well, I would say it's a necessity as far as community policing, just because right now things are being twisted so bad against us, just because just the hatred of law enforcement in general. You could be the nicest guy ever in the community you serve, but because you wear that uniform now, everything you do is wrong. Well, when we hide in our cars and we just speed by, go to different calls, there's no interaction with those people. They don't know who you are. And you continue to have that image of bitch being stuck up mean cop. You get out where in a community and get more on a personal level when it's not even for law enforcement, just to be there and be seen, show them that you are human. You're just like everybody else. You just chose this job. In the end, I think it'll benefit the department that you have that interaction as far as help from the community. I know everybody here has probably been on a call in a certain area. You ask what happened and nobody saw anything. You know, I think if we get back into foot patrols and community outreach, we won't have that as much. You'll still have some people that'll come forward and help you out in your long-term investigation of criminal enforcement.
Foot patrol can solve crime, mobile patrols can't.
To expand on that, I think it's a lot